today. So Brad mentioned I represent a group called the University Industry Demonstration Partnership. I'll just give you a quick overview of who we are. We're a membership organization of large companies from around the world and large universities, research-intensive universities. Most state flagship universities are members, but we also have a lot of private schools in the mix, and we work to solve problems at the university-industry interface. And so if you're interested in learning more about university-industry engagement, we're, I think, a go-to place to go. Let me make a few comments before I talk about, and I only have a few slides that I think might be relevant. The first is that I believe that university-industry engagement is a good thing. And you say, well, Tony, of course you do, and we believe that. Well, that is not a universally shared view. So I think that we tend to think of university industry engagement as being a good thing in the abstract, but when it comes down to specific examples of things, sometimes people get uncomfortable. So let me give you a quick illustration. A university faculty member at the University of Tennessee, Taylor's institution, works with Eastman, based in Tennessee, on a project. And it results in a new material that gets put into a polymer, and Eastman makes an additional $500,000 a year, and the university gets back a small royalty on that of, say, $50,000. No problem. Let's say, though, it results in a new product that leads to $500 million of revenue, and the university gets a check for $50 million, and a faculty member gets a check for $20 million as a state employee. Some of you all will get a letter, because it'll be in the paper, and some of you all will get a letter from somebody in the state of Tennessee saying, well, I'm a taxpayer, and my husband works at the State Department of Health, and they invent stuff. They work just as hard as that faculty member, and they can't get a check for $20 million. And why are they getting a check for $20 million? And why is the university getting $50 million? So this is just an issue that I think comes up every now and then, and I think as it relates to this audience, it's something I thought I would just bring up. I also think that there's a big difference between, when we talk about university industry engagement, when we talk about large companies versus small and mid-sized companies. So contextually, we talk about university industry engagement, and we think about all companies being monolithic, and they're not. The way that state universities and private schools will engage small companies is totally different than they'll engage large multinational companies. So I just think that's something to keep in mind. Another point I would like to make to groups like yours is that, you know, universities are the Fortune 500 company in your state that isn't going to leave. So they are an economic powerhouse. When you look at the numbers in terms of high-paying, knowledge-based jobs, when you look at the revenue that they generate, that they bring in from out of state, it's pretty impactful. And I know you don't tend to think of universities as Fortune 500 companies, but candidly, most of them operate as such in many ways. I would say as state legislators, you know, one of the things that impacts university industry engagement are rules and regulations. And I'm going to talk about that a little bit more in a few minutes, but anything that you can do to make it easier for groups to work together, I think, is a really good thing. And then I just want to make maybe one other comment that I think is worth note. I see a lot of infighting within states and then among states about working with companies or within themselves, and a lot of fighting. I used to be at the University of South Carolina for a number of years, and you know, not just on the football field, but we had a big rivalry with Clemson, you know, and the medical university, and we'd always be fighting for resources. The reality is we're fighting companies, we're fighting with other states, but we're also fighting globally to attract and retain talent and to get companies to put in facilities in our states. We have a lot of things going against us, candidly, because as more sales are made overseas, companies are going to do more research and development overseas, and that's just a fact of life. And that's just something I think we need to think about. So there are a lot of activities where states and within a state, cities and universities are fighting over trying to get resources from state legislators. And I'm just telling you that the companies don't think about states. They think about countries, and they think globally. And it's just not something you should forget. So I put together just a few slides with a few comments. This is a slide coming out of a report out of the United Kingdom called the Dowling Review, where they actually took an analysis of their innovation ecosystem. And you don't need to read this slide. I'll give it to Brad. You can have this slide. The point here is that they spent time looking at who they were and what they did. And the point is, they needed to know thyself. You will hear anecdotally a lot from university folks or economic development folks about how great you are. And as Brad alluded to, if you don't have data behind that and you really don't know who you are, it's a challenge. You know, I have a standing joke that there are 100 universities in the top 20, and that's just the reality. And so without having this type of information on your ecosystem, I think it's a challenge then to make informed decisions as to where to make investments. So know thyself, I think, is something that's important to know. All right, as it relates to this group, you know, what is it that states can do or the federal government can do to support university industry engagement? And there's really, I think, two different fundamental approaches. One is to act more like a farmer, where you cultivate land and then you let companies and universities plant seeds in fertile soil and let them be successful or fail on their own merits. The other option is to be a conductor and direct exactly how they'll work together. And a lot of states, candidly, have made very significant investments with the absolute best of intentions and directed companies and universities to work together. Now, I'm not comparing companies and universities to dogs, but I will tell you this: if you create programs that incentivize companies and universities to work a certain way, guess what happens? They work a certain way. The real question is, how sustainable is it if you're directing the activities versus creating a fertile environment for university industry engagement? And so I think, you know, a really good example of that, and I know Mark's going to talk a little bit later, is, you know, Mark's institution has a great relationship with Eastman, and I know he's going to talk about another relationship, but that wasn't predicated because the state of North Carolina directed it. It happened because Eastman did a very thorough analysis of who they wanted to work with based on data, and they identified institutions to do that, and they made decisions. Where the state helped is by creating a fertile environment out in the Research Triangle area that allowed them to make that a reality. So I hope, if you don't remember anything else I said today, I hope you keep in mind this farmer versus conductor approach to how state governments can support university industry engagement. Okay, so let me give you just a couple of quick examples. I travel around the world, as Brad said, looking at how different places do this. In Germany, they have something called the Fraunhofer system, which is a system of research centers that work beyond what universities do in terms of basic research, but they don't necessarily do what companies do in terms of developing products. They're in that interstitial space. They receive about 1/3 of their funding from the state, and they have to generate 2/3 of their funding by working with companies. So they're distinct from the university system. It's almost like a national lab system in Germany, and they eat what they kill. So if they are not successful, they don't have jobs. Okay? Now, there are some Fraunhofers in the US, but they're not as robust as they are in Germany. And so I actually think the Fraunhofer system has a lot of merit and a lot of value. And we could spend a whole session talking about that, and I don't want to do that. We don't have time to do that. Ohio has a great program called Third Frontier, but I will tell you, every state has a program. So you can go to a group called SSTI.org. There's a state group that looks at all these programs. And I think if you talk to company folks, what they'll tell you is they want to work with state governments and universities and the federal government to do something called co-creation. So what they want is they want your support, financial and non-financial, to match what they're putting in, to match what maybe the federal government's putting in, and maybe what the university's putting in, or a local economic development group. So I hear a lot about co-creation from companies. So a company like Procter & Gamble in Ohio, they're willing to invest resources in the state of Ohio, and they've got a great relationship, for example, with the University of Cincinnati. They want Ohio, through programs like Third Frontier, to support them, and then they're going to try to go out and get money from the federal government to support their R&D activities. And so you know, once again, every state has some type of program, and I think some of them are more successful than others. But it really should be focused on this whole idea of co-creation. If you talk to company folks, that's what they're interested in. Okay, and like I said, there's this group called SSTI. You can get more information about different state programs. They have a weekly mailing, I think, that they put out. Brad talked about T-shaped individuals. I just want to briefly mention the workforce, and you've already seen this slide, but this is certainly something that we're hearing from companies about their ability to recruit and retain talent. You know, when you're outside the coasts, candidly, it can be difficult sometimes to retain talent in your communities, and I think this is a challenge that you have. How your universities go about preparing people for careers in today's world, I think, is of interest. And as Brad mentioned, we're holding this summit at the National Academies in mid-March. It's led by IBM, Michigan State, Purdue, Charlotte, Virginia Tech, Canon Design, Elsevier, and the National Academies in our group, the UIDP. And if you really want to learn about how to develop students into trained professionals that will be career ready, this will be a great place to do that.